Ironside will not be seen tonight, so we may bring you the following special program.
If you're here at Word Balloon, it's because you like comics, creators, conversation, pop culture subjects. Would you consider joining the League of Word Balloon listeners? Patreon.com/wordballoon. When you subscribe, you'll also be part of the Word Balloon Book Club, where Brian Michael Bendis and I will pick a comic every month to review and discuss live with the League on this show. Join the League today, patreon.com/wordballoon. Thank you always for your support, League of Word Balloon listeners. Welcome back, everybody. It's time again for another edition of Word Balloon's Trek Watch, and really happy to have joining us today the great writer and editor of so many great stories, novels, comics, short stories, Bob Greenberger. Welcome back to Word Balloon.
Hey, how are you, John?
Doing all right. I'm sorry that we're talking on a sad occasion, man. We're gonna, honor a co-worker of yours who's done a lot of great work in comics and novels and short stories, all three. The great Peter David, and happy to talk about him and his wonderful works. And of course, we'll also talk about this IDW archive that has three fantastic stories of Peter's. Mm-hmm. You were the editor of the Star Trek run. Was it just DC for you, Bob, or did you do it at Marvel as well?
No. I did not edit anything at Marvel, and they didn't have the license at the time I was there in 2001. So no, it was just the 8 years at DC.
That's a long time, man. That's a lot of issues. How many total for you?
I probably should count.
That's all right.
I honestly don't know.
8 years is good. Was it monthly?
Pretty much. I mean, there was a 10-month gap in 1987 that was very annoying, but beyond my control.
What was it? Just rights between Paramount and DC essentially during that period?
The contract was up for renewal, and it was not a priority to either DC or Paramount, apparently, and it took 10 months to cut the deal and get the books back up and running.
Man, some of the stories were fantastic because, well, a lot of the stories were fantastic, but I really appreciated that period between. And let me make sure I got it right, Star Trek 3 and 4, where you really had to kind of invent stories, kind of in a similar way that Marvel had with Star Wars, between Empire and Jedi, and even between New Hope and Empire. Because I know I've talked to Walt Simonson about that period as far as Star Wars goes. But yeah, what was that? Was that a challenge for you guys to come up with ideas?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, at the time this was coming up, Marv Wolfman had stepped down as the editor, and it was being written and edited by Mike W. Barr, with me backstopping him. And the two of us paid a visit to Harv Bennett, the producer of the Star Trek films, to talk about what we could do to fill the gap. Harv gave us some ideas, told us some things to avoid, such as time travel. And we were given a pretty free hand. And once we got the Star Trek 4 script, we knew where we had to bring things full circle.
Yeah, you had, because you guys kind of revived Spock but had to put him kind of back in the fugue state or whatever you would describe where
Right.
Spock was in Star Trek 4.
Right. I mean, when we pick up with him in Star Trek 4, we see him being tested. And with that final question, how do you feel? So by putting him on the Surak and sending him away, he can have some adventures and figure out in a much more low stakes environment than the Enterprise. Was he really ready to return to duty?
Let's talk about Peter's contributions to Star Trek. And by the way, everybody, happy to talk about your favorite Peter David DC stories, Marvel stories, his original stuff. I mean, of course, I think we'll acknowledge even New Frontier as far as that wonderful series. Sure. But so Peter had already been writing novels before he started writing Star Trek comics. Which came first? Am I right that it was the novels first?
Not the Star Trek novels, no. I want to see if I can get this straight. So Peter was on staff at Marvel in the marketing department from about 82 onward and started writing around 85. Started doing some Spider-Man stories for Jim Owsley, now known as Christopher Priest. And that led to Bob Harris showing up in his door one day going, "You want to write The Incredible Hulk?" Peter wanted to give it some thought, said, "Let me do 6 issues and see if we both like what we're doing." 6 issues became 12 years.
Yeah, what a run. Absolutely, man.
He's go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, among my favorite Hulk stories, I've got images loaded, of course, his move to make the Hulk Joe Fixit, one of my favorite things. And of course, go ahead. You got thoughts on Joe Fixit, please?
Well, I was going to say, one of the things that Peter did was he built on what had come before, and going all the way back to Stan talking about this being inspired by Jekyll and Hyde, and then what Bill Mantlo established that he was beaten by his father. Peter went into the deep psychology of this multiple personality disorder, starting with this abused child, and there's more than one personality in Bruce Banner's psyche. And he started playing around with that. So we had multiple versions of the Hulk, best remembered with the Joe Fixit incarnation, going back to the gray skin. And then, of course, he took it to the other extreme with the Maestro.
Absolutely. And I am a massive fan of the Maestro story, Future Imperfect, among other great stories as well. And what an interesting challenge to make the Hulk brilliant in his later years. And
he came up with the fusion of Bruce Banner and the Hulk as Professor Hulk, which led to the Maestro, which of course also inspired the Mark Ruffalo version of the Professor Hulk in Endgame.
Yeah, I really wonder. I mean, obviously, still in Professor Hulk mode in the She-Hulk TV series, and I'm wondering what he'll look like in Doomsday and also Secret War coming up. We'll see.
Well, my other understanding is there's a rumor out there that the Bruce Banner side of him will play a part in the new Spider-Man film.
Right. I did read that. You're absolutely right about that. Yeah, it's going to be interesting, man. And my hope is for either Doomsday or Secret Wars that we also see Harrison Ford's Red Hulk and bring back Tatiana Maslany as She-Hulk. Why not have 3 Hulks, for the price of 1?
I'll just buy my popcorn and sit in the audience.
Did you see, quick aside, did you see Thunderbolts?
Enjoyed it very much.
Me too. I'm sorry that it, I don't know what the expectation was, Bob. And really, it's for so many years, that blockbuster imperative mentality of the studios. On the one hand, I appreciate it. On the other hand, kind of audacious to be like, well, we should at least make $700 or $800 million. And it's like, let's deal with reality. I don't know what the expectation was, but at least they made a good movie. That's all.
They made a good movie. It got better reviews than the previous Captain America film from February.
Yeah.
I think Thunderbolts worked because it was about character. There was actually some character-driven motivation, especially for Yelena, but for everybody else. And, you know, by being character driven, plus the mystery of Bob, it felt like a throwback to some of the earlier Marvel movies that were character driven, not MacGuffin driven.
Agreed. And we'll see what happens with Fantastic Four and all the other dominoes that follow, I guess.
Well, I got my ticket already.
I hear you, man. Back to Peter David.
Sure.
God.
Well, I'll point out to you, Peter
Please.
was still doing the marketing job at Marvel and writing the Hulk, and he was starting to get a little antsy because editorial was starting to, grumble, favoritism, marketing his own books and that sort of thing. So Peter started sniffing around about doing writing elsewhere. And somehow Mike Gold reached out to him about writing the Phantom miniseries when DC acquired the license. And Peter called me up and he said, I've got this offer from Mike Gold. I'm thinking about going full-time freelance. Would you have any writing for me at DC? And I said, I've got this Star Trek comic. I mean, Mike Carlin was writing it for me. Mike was doing it because I was having trouble finding somebody, to run with it. Mike was doing it. He liked it, but didn't have the passion for it. And as soon as I mentioned Peter, he knew Peter from their staff days together. And Mike was like, yeah, go. God bless.
That's great. That's fantastic. I mean, and what a facility. All of Peter David's licensed character work, whether it's in novels or in comics, he really, I assume, both was a fan of the properties and also researched them quite well and found these great little nuggets using characters or previous plots and fleshing out brand new stories. And a lot of people refer to it as fan service. I disagree. I just think it's my metaphor is always coloring within the lines and not.
Well, fan service is one of those terms where, and it's a very wavy line, but this is pre-internet. This is, you see the people at conventions here and there, and you get the letters, but Peter was doing this because he did the research and he loved Star Trek. He had been, like me, grew up on the WPIX reruns throughout the 70s, read the novelizations by James Blish, and we knew this stuff. We could quote lines to each other and talk about secondary and tertiary characters. And he brought that fan knowledge to writing this, so he was able to find these nuggets to work with. But he also was handed a robust supporting cast of original characters that Mike Barr first introduced, because we needed characters we could do things with and break without having to reset the status quo like you would have to with the 7 main characters. Did Mike create Running Bear, the Native American crew member? No, Bear Claw.
Bear Claw, I beg your pardon.
Yeah. No, that was a Mike Barr character.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, go on.
So Barr used him a lot and was building up this relationship with Nancy. So Peter decided his first story should, bring them to a wedding. We had the 50th issue coming up, and he figured that's a really good thing to do the wedding with. He had a lot of fun getting the feel for the characters and dealing with Paramount licensing. And we had we were feeling our way through it, but we already had the 50th issue coming up. We already had a manual on the schedule, and Peter came up with that brilliant Scotty story. He just hit the ground running.
That's great. Let's talk about the Scotty story for a second. It was drawn by Kurt Swan, which I love.
Right. So
that's great.
Kurt was coming off Superman. He had a contract with DC, and we were looking for things for Kurt to do that respected his talent. And we put him on the Mask toy tie-in comic that Mike Gold and I were editing, and then Carlin edited, and it was like, this is a waste of his talent. So when I had the opportunity to give him a Star Trek story where he could really breathe a little bit and not be so beholden to the likenesses and the technology, because it was set just Scotty and these other characters, we were able to work with his strengths at that time, and he was happy to do it. He really enjoyed the script. Peter challenged himself to follow the backward storytelling style that David Mamet had used in a play, and he wanted to see if he could pull that off in a comic, and it turned out to be one of the favorite stories of the decade.
No question, man. It really is this wonderful look at Scotty's life and filled in a lot of backstory that we never had, access to before. So, go ahead.
After Star Trek II established that Peter Preston was his nephew, that meant he had siblings. So that was ripe for exploration.
Absolutely. And also just that woman he leaves behind. And, tragic, man. And it's, like you said, also that backward motif of storytelling, the end of their marriage to when they first meet each other and discover each other. It's really great. And I mean, this is what, good writers like yourself included, honestly, that
let me tell you,
some flushing of this stuff. Go ahead.
Peter and I both remembered a line in the James Blish original novel, Spock Must Die, the first original Star Trek novel for adults that was written.
Yes.
And there was a reference to Scotty's wife back on Earth. Because the idea that you're, a commissioned officer, you're on the starship, just like a military man, you leave your wife behind back on base.
Sure.
And that stuck with us, like, woman behind? And, so we were able to work with that.
I love that, man. I think some fan also wrote later a great story about Kelsey Grammer's character, Morgan Bateson, who makes that one appearance in Cause and Effect from Next Generation. And he certainly is of the Kirk Scotty era, Spock era. And that there was like a bar discussion with Scotty and Captain Bateson, and they had a woman in common, which I thought was a great thing. And also both men, for different reasons, are suddenly in that TNG era as relics of the previous era and stuff. And, I just appreciated that interaction. Do you know the story I'm talking about? I wish I could give it more credit.
I remember it. I'm trying to remember who wrote that story. It's been a while.
I hear you, man. No. And that was the great thing about those Strange New Worlds. But back to the comics and the novels that you both edited and wrote, and Peter too, and also other great Star Trek writers over the years. So was Richard Arnold the guy at Paramount that was kind of vetting these stories and approving them or disapproving them?
There was a licensing department at Paramount that approved everything, and they had people come and go through the years until about 87 or 88, when they hired a former Star Trek fan named Paula Block, who came from book publishing. Paula knew Star Trek as a fan and was a brilliant representative for the property, because when she would call up and say, you can't do this, but try A, B, and C.
Oh, great.
Because rather than just tell us there's a problem, she had solutions to offer as well. And it made for a marvelous relationship. And she was wonderful for that franchise for ages and ages and ages. So what happened is, in 1986, there was a 20th anniversary party for Star Trek, at which point Roddenberry and Paramount cut the deal for what became Next Generation. Part of the deal was Gene wanted to have say on the licensing, especially the novels and the comics. Gene had Richard Arnold hanging around doing whatever and put him on staff and used Richard as the liaison. The problem was Richard was a fan of Star Trek and a devotee of Gene, but he wasn't trained in licensing. He wasn't trained in how do you adapt medium A to medium B. And in a lot of ways, he was very zealously protecting what Gene had done, and anything outside Gene's lines was beyond, not satisfactory. Peter always told the story that when he wrote the novel A Rock and a Hard Place, Riker makes a reference that, this doesn't go well, I'm going to be patrolling the neutral zone in my underwear. Richard's comment on the manuscript was, it has not been established that Starfleet officers wear underwear. It was that kind of literal understanding of whatever Gene had established. And that became a bone of contention for the 17 or so issues Peter wrote under Richard's involvement when the license came back in 1987.
Wow, that's crazy, man. But again, kind of reminds me of apparently Carrie Fisher hearing that from George Lucas regarding Princess Leia, that there's no underwear in space. So
he just, that's a whole other fetish.
Yeah.
But the thing is that Richard made it personal when it didn't need to be. He didn't understand. No one had trained him how to be a professional representing Gene and Gene's production office and interfacing with the licensing department and the licensees. And he made it very difficult for the writers of the novels and the comics on picayune things such as star dates. Even though Gene had written a memo, 2 pocketbooks that they kept on the pinned to the wall of the office with Gene saying, "We just made this stuff up. Don't worry about star dates." Richard worried about star dates.
Understood.
Things like that.
Wow.
And it increasingly became obvious that Richard was not a fan of Peter's writing, Peter's humor. Part of Richard's edict to us when we were bringing the book back after the 10-month hiatus was all these secondary characters Mike created and the 2 animated characters, Arix and Marez, were gone. We had to tighten the focus on the 7 main characters, once again putting us in a box where we couldn't do a lot of great character stuff because they're going to be in the movies in 10 months or whatever. So Peter decided, okay, and he did all these other stories and then decided to bring in a new romantic interest, R.J. Blaze. And Peter was doing the slow burn, will they, won't they, relationship, until finally Richard was making it clear he wanted R.J. off the ship. And we said, but it's a romantic interest, to which Richard said he's no longer interested in women. At that point, Peter and I understood that we were going to have increasing problems getting stuff through. And we tested that point. After Peter wrote the Worthy story, 3-parter with Bill Mumy, Peter was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm screwing you up. I'm hurting the book. I'm not having a good time anymore. I'll do, we'll wrap it up and I'll leave. And we were having such troubles getting the scripts through that I ended up getting a fill-in from J. Michael Straczynski for his first comic book script, followed by a 2-parter by Howard Weinstein. And then Peter was going to come back with issue 19. And the original premise wasn't working. So Peter wrote 2 other premises under 2 pseudonyms, including one Robert Bruce Banner. And issue 19, the story of the red shirt, which Peter shamelessly borrowed the basic premise from an episode of MASH. That was the premise by Robert Bruce Banner that Richard approved. And after we got the script approved and the art drawn, we put Peter's name on instead of the pseudonym.
That's great. I did want to talk about both that story and first The Worthy, the story that Peter co-wrote with Billy Mumy.
Sure.
The Worthy is such a great story. Would have made a hell of a episode, movie, or novel. And it really introduced this new, interesting alien race, a new, interesting problem. Captain Styles from Search for Spock, he with the riding crop, played by James Syking in the movie and stuff. He's back as a thorn in Kirk's side. Great story, man. I really, really loved it. And also how this new race impacted all the different members of the crew.
Mm-hmm. Obviously some of that was thinly veiled, the Lost in Space stuff with Bill's involvement. We had to sand it a little further, take some of the similarities further removed. But they definitely created stuff that we were hoping to explore and then couldn't. With Peter gone, Howard had his own ideas, and we let him run in a different direction.
How much longer did? Go ahead. I'm sorry, Bob. I didn't mean
by the time they wrote The Worthy, issues 13, 14, and 15, it was clear Peter was not going to make it, which is why we got the fill-ins, which is what led to issue 19. and Peter was gone. And Howard, longtime friend of mine, was liked writing the two-parter and was up for replacing Peter as the regular writer of the comic book. And Howard's sensibilities was very true to Star Trek, but definitely was more in keeping with what Richard was looking for stories.
Understood. That's a shame. So how much longer did the comic run go after Peter left?
Well, Peter left with issue 19. It ran until issue 80.
Oh, there you go. Of course, my guy.
After Howie wrote the majority of the run after that point. There were fill-ins here and there, but he stayed on it. He outlasted multiple editors after me, because after me was Margaret Clark and Kim Yale and Alan Gold. And then the book finally, the license was up and they took it back to Marvel.
Got it. Yeah, that's amazing. And I'll be honest, man, I really came to the book after the fact because I was in college and couldn't afford comics in that period when every penny counts. So it really has been in trades that I have come back to some of these stories. And again, was already a fan of Peter's from the novel standpoint. So it was great to read some of these great things. And again, we mentioned the red shirt eulogy that he has to write.
You're right.
Kirk has to write. Great. Another great story. And that's okay that he lifts the idea from MASH. It's different enough. So, the basic trappings. But also the trial of James Kirk is an outstanding story.
Well, that's where one of the things that Harv Bennett told me and Peter when we talked about how to vamp between Star Trek 4 and 5 was dealing with the repercussions of what the John Shuck character, Klingon, basically threatened that, there'll be no peace in the universe with Kirk around. And that led to the trial.
Great moments. Bella Oxmix comes back from a piece of the action, the Gangster Planet.
The beauty of the comic and the novels was that we could look at the repercussions of those actions, which television in the 1960s rarely touched on. And I don't mean just Star Trek. I mean Bonanza, Mission Impossible, all the dramas of the day. There would be things with where a character does something and there's no repercussions because you're on to the next episode, and they're all, filmed and aired out of any order. So you couldn't build episode to episode continuity. That really didn't happen until the beginnings. Could be felt in the 70s. So Peter, was able to go back and say, all right, what happened to Sigma Iosha after McCoy left the communicator behind?
That's great. I don't know if you've had the opportunity or interest, the current writers at IDW, especially Colin Kelly and Jackson Lanzig. They did a great year 5 story examining Sigma Iosha again and how technology changed things.
I've been reading them all.
There you go, man. That's so great to hear, Bob, because truly, as we get older, and I said this more of people that were older than us, like Len Wein and Marv and some of the others, that it's like, can you still read the, main lines of DC and Marvel, or even in the case of Star Trek stories, and still get enjoyment? Or is that my metaphor for that is, are you working at a hardware store and, hey, now that I can relax, let me dive into a pile of nails? You know what I mean?
People like Len and Marv and Peter and myself, we grew up as comic book fans. We still love the medium. Are we a bunch of crotchety old men complaining about it? They didn't do it the way we did it. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I don't think is being as well done as it could be. I think there's some stuff that's brilliantly done. I mean, there's some writers and artists working today I would kill to work with if I were still editing. I still read as a fan. I definitely continue to read all the DC stuff because I continue to consult with their international department. So I have to stay current on the material.
That's cool. What does that entail?
When they do the licensed collection, specifically the English language stuff that Hachette and the replacement to Eagle Moss. There are two different companies doing licensed collections overseas. I look at all the front and back matter to make sure what's being written about the stories and the creators is accurate. Make sure what they're writing about matches what's being reprinted and all.
That's great to hear. That's excellent. Well, they need a good critical eye to make sure everything's cool. So very, very good to hear that, man. Peter's novels, really, let's see, New Frontier. What a wonderful opportunity to create, this combination of some past crew members and other characters that were, in the Star Trek world for only one episode or two episodes, and then also just the creation of Mackenzie Calhoun and the Excalibur, the ship. The New Frontier series was just amazing.
The editor at the time, John Ordover, very much a comic book fan. In fact, I ran a letter of comment of his in Crisis Number 3. Go figure. But John wanted to bring a lot of comic book tropes to the Star Trek novel line, which is how he ended up doing, the multiple crossover events or event novel series, to goose sales and get, you can't just buy this individual novel. You got to buy the rest to see what happens. He did his version of the Brave and the Bold event and all. And the idea of spinoffs became the New Frontier. At the time, you may recall, Stephen King did The Green Mile as 4 chapbooks that came out like monthly to recreate the old pulp feel, and then got collected finally as the book. That sold like a son of a gun, and they decided to try that with something new and created the New Frontier for that.
That's great. It was amazing. And again, returns of Commander Shelby from Best of Both Worlds, and Captain Jellicoe gets promoted to be an admiral from right. I'm blanking on There Are Four Lights.
It was Robin Leffler.
Robin Leffler, absolutely. Yeah.
Ashley Judd character from 2 episodes.
Right. And also, even before that, one of my favorite individual David books was The Rift, that has, and especially as we're 6 weeks away from Strange New Worlds, it starts off as a Captain Pike story, and then jumps to the movie era of the original cast, and you see an older Jose Tyler, who was the original helmsman or navigator. I forget which position, like Sulu and Chekhov, he technically was. But
Tyler, if I recall right, was at navigation because you had number 1 at the helm.
There you go. Excellent, man. And even Dr. Daystrom comes back from the Ultimate Computer N5, and of course during the subsequent years, acknowledged by the Daystrom Institute, and Ambassador Fox from A Taste of Armageddon, I believe. I mean, again, it was that kind of thing where Peter would put these Easter eggs in before the term was used, I think. And you'd be like, oh, yeah, look at that. There's so-and-so. That's wonderful, man, to see these characters. Dr. Sailor, another New Frontier character, the Vulcan Doctor.
Susie Plaxton, yeah.
Susie Plaxton, absolutely. The actress. I love her. Absolutely.
So, I want to, since we're talking about Peter, but we also talked about Richard Arnold stuff. I don't want to make it sound like Richard was only a pain in the neck.
Okay.
I want to give credit where credit is due. For Star Trek's anniversary, we were doing the marketing department came to me and said, we'd like to do anniversary stuff, including an additional Star Trek miniseries and the Next Generation miniseries. And it was the marketing department that said, and they should have a story that connects the two. And then the books will come out bi-weekly. So we make some momentum out of it. That became the Madala imperative. And we came up with a story. Michael Jan Friedman, Peter, and I, and Paula Block had just gotten to Paramount, and she said, it's not quite working. She put us on the phone with Richard Arnold, and all of us had a big conference call for about 90 minutes. And it was Richard, to his credit, who pointed out that to link Kirk's era to the Next Generation era, you have both Spock and McCoy having been established as surviving to Picard's time. So something they experienced and have them show up and carry forward, which of course then led to Spock and Data having that great chess match where all they did was say moves to each other without a board.
You're right, and I'm so glad you brought up that crossover story because it is great, and again, it was the opportunity in the comics to extend. There's what's McCoy doing in the 24th century? What is Spock doing in the 24th century? So I'm with you on that. So also, God, there was a great McCoy novel from about 15 years ago or so, where maybe 18 years now, where it really went through McCoy's life and also had an alternate timeline of what happened to him during the Edith Keeler period.
David R. George wrote that. I forget
So
the name
good.
of it. Yeah, for another anniversary, David did 3 alternate realities: one's Kirk, one Spock, one McCoy. They were really good.
Yeah, and again, the opportunity to do these final conversations that we didn't get to see on screen, but can happen in the novels, can happen in the comics and stuff. And yeah, man, they make for great touching moments when you love these characters as much as we all do. So I get that. Tell me about Crazy Eights and your collective. We've talked about it before on the show, but I know Peter was involved with that.
Peter was there from the get-go, and when Peter had gotten sick about 3 years ago, we started talking about, well, what could we do to keep you actively involved while you were hopefully recuperating and rehabbing? And he had written several novels, complete manuscripts that he had an agent try to sell. And for whatever reason, they weren't selling. He said, I'll put one out through Crazy Eight, just to keep my name out there. And of the ones, he had picked this book, Robin of Sherwood, which was featuring Robin Hood's daughter. And once his wife Kathleen got me the manuscript, I edited it, and Aaron Rosenberg put the book together, and we put it out last summer. It had a cliffhanger ending, and Peter and Kathleen assured me somewhere in his files was the outline to what the second novel was going to be. And we were hoping Peter to get well enough to finish it, get back to the outline and finish it. That never happened. While we were at Trek Long Island last weekend, his daughter Caroline told us at the memorial panel that she is in possession of his laptop and going through all of his files, cleaning them up and organizing them, because Peter was not particularly good on naming conventions for consistency. So once she can find that synopsis and hopeful outline to the second book, she is going to write the sequel, which I will edit and we will put out, and hopefully generate some revenue for the household.
That's great, man. And I certainly hope that happens. Very, very cool. Really, really cool. Did he ever contribute? You did your and again, I'll let you give the title, but you've had your collection of pulp heroes and superhero collections. Did he ever contribute to those?
Yes, I can. I've done 4 editions of my Thrilling Adventure. Peter was in the first 3 before he got sick. So he's got different stories in each volume, different characters, different milieu. He had some fun, stretched the boundaries of what was really pulp style. Leaned into his humor a little bit there. He was happy to contribute to all of these anthologies because you get in, you get out, you do a story, you stretch a muscle, scratch an itch or whatever. He would have been continuing to contribute to these had he been healthy.
How would you describe what you do from an editing standpoint for both the Star Trek stuff that Peter did and also stuff for your own series?
Okay, so when you edit for a comic book, you obviously have to make sure that it's what the script has is clear to the artist what he has to draw. So you have to make sure all the descriptions are there, all the detail is there. So you have to think like an artist. Could I draw from this script? And then you have to make sure the dialogue sounds like the characters. It's not too verbose per panel. Is it paced right? And then the extra layer for a licensed book is, do they talk like the characters they're supposed to be? Does Kirk sound like Kirk? And then you've got to, interface with the licensing department and gently suggest, maybe you need to tweak this exchange for whatever reason. So a lot of the editing is creative. The real creative stuff happens up front when you're brainstorming the story ideas and you're batting them around before you submit them. And when Peter came back to the book after a 10-month hiatus. He had like a 6-issue outline, figured out, starting with the trial. He knew exactly where he wanted to go, and that gave Paramount the confidence to say, "Go, have a good time." For prose, it's different. Obviously, it's the writer's style. So you're looking for internal logic. You're looking for consistency in the writing. Obviously, mechanics like grammar. But Peter knew so much of this stuff, and his prose needed very little in the way of editing. He was a pretty good grammarian, so his manuscripts were fairly clean.
That's cool. I hope the body of work is being explored by fans. And sadly, sometimes that happens when we lose a creator. But I mean, consistently, his stuff has always sold well. It seems.
I would say so. He had done some original stuff. He was really hoping to do more and more original stuff. He had created sort of apropos novels for Simon and Schuster.
Yes,
that did okay. He did Nightlife and its sequel, and he did Howling Mad. He was definitely trying to do more as a prose writer of fiction, mostly science fiction and fantasy stuff. Never gained the traction we all thought he deserved. And that's why his agent, for whatever reason, his agent couldn't sell those last couple of manuscripts. But it does mean we do have more Peter David stories to release over the next hopeful couple of years.
Here's hoping, man. Absolutely. And also, I'm really glad that all of you, as part of Crazy 8, and the ones that always come on Word Balloon, and I appreciate it, Michael Jan Friedman, yourself, Paul Kupperberg. It's great that you guys have taken this initiative to write new original stuff. So
that's why it's the reason we created this. We created Crazy 8 because there was stuff we wanted to write. We felt passionate about that. We wanted to get out there. That for one reason or another, we were told we can't sell that. Your book scan numbers aren't strong enough, or whatever excuse they had to say no.
Yeah, and again, luckily you guys have enough of a community of an audience and making the rounds too at the conventions that you do. Like you mentioned, the Star Trek Long Island thing. Are you getting fans of your stuff in general when you make appearances at conventions and they want to get your original stuff as well?
It's a mix, show to show. Depends. It's a Star Trek show. They're there for the Star Trek guests. So I bring some of my older Star Trek books that I still have copies to sell. Or people bring me an armload of books from their shelf and have me sign it. And I'm happy to do that and talk to them about stuff. A couple will pick up the newer stuff, but it's the more literary or more media-oriented shows, not just Star Trek focused, where I seem to reach different audiences.
Comment from Peter Beiser. He said, I was always interested in the Spock and Savick child from the Pon farr scene in Star Trek 3 that was abandoned. Would have been an interesting story in the comics and novels. I imagine that's something that they wanted to stay away from, given that we never got that scene in Star Trek 4 that acknowledged the pregnancy.
Right. I mean, that came from Herb Bennett. We're not going there. Don't try.
Did you watch the Otoy Kirk in the Afterlife scene that they created with Sam Worthington, the actor, and a little bit of
that was it was heartfelt and it brought a tear to your eye, but boy, was it kind of creepy.
Interesting. I understand. Well, I mean, I refer to AI as this tidal wave that it's like, hey man, it's going to crash at all of us. So I at least appreciated that Nimoy's estate and Shatner was on board. And the Roddenberry Archive is on board, so it certainly had the right backing.
Right. And I'm so glad that there are now people who are agents of people's legacies, so that, you want to use Marilyn Monroe or Groucho Marx, you got to pay a licensing fee for their likenesses and all.
Yes.
That's great, because that means that controls what you can do with those personalities, so that people can't just feel like doing a Marilyn Monroe porn film and, use AI.
Yeah, I'm hip. Yeah, I know what you mean, man. Yikes! It's true. How about the new stuff? Like I said, we're we've talked, I think, basically in the past about some of the newer Star Trek that's been produced since 2016. We're about to get season 3 of Star Trek: Strange New Worlds. Are you watching?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, yeah. I'm current. I very much enjoyed how they wrapped up Lower Decks
Yeah,
and
Prodigy.
Prodigy. Thank you, Prodigy. Yes.
No problem. Yeah. No, honestly, Prodigy and I Lower Decks grew on me because I really
Right.
felt at first I'm like, I think you're trying too hard to be funny, and you're not that funny. But I have to say they found their footing, and really the last couple of seasons I thought were great and really inventive
Yes.
and interesting. But Prodigy, I think, was the biggest delightful surprise, given that it was supposed to be a Nickelodeon, entry level show, and it was. But I mean, I felt like it was the most Star Trek of all the new shows.
In a lot of ways, it was. It really explored friendship and care, and respect for diversity, which was always Gene's main theme. And we explored strange new worlds, and we had character, and it really was accessible to younger people, which I think was great.
But again, I think it gave enough for us adults to go, oh, these are good ideas. Really, a lot of the story ideas is specific story ideas. It's like that's an inventive idea, and also giving justice, if you will, to characters like Ocampa and or Okana, rather Okana, not Ocampa. Ocampa,
the outrageous Okana.
Yes, indeed, and even Wesley, I think, got a nice story, a much better storyline than that weird appearance at the end of season 2 of Picard, in my opinion.
The Traveler was such a unique concept. It's like the writers aren't quite sure what to do with it after it got introduced.
I actually liked them merging Gary Seven as from Assignment Earth as a potential traveler, and that I didn't mind. I don't know how you felt about it.
Well, he was a specially trained operative from this other organization we know nothing about. So that always struck me as something separate and out there that, had the show ever been picked up, we would have explored. There was the recent comic that I think Lansing and his partner did that took all the omnipotent beings and put them in one story.
Yes,
to work out terrorism reality and all. I thought that was an interesting idea. I'm not sure the execution pulled it off as well as it could have been.
I love that book in general, though, and I love that combination. And it's great to see Cisco running a ship, and there's Scotty, and there's Crusher, and Lore of all things, and the new characters that they've introduced, the Andorian and the young Vulcan. I really, I think Lansing and Kelly are great. Chris Cantwell too, and I don't know if it's out yet, but I know IDW sent me advance the Red Shirts series that Cantwell is getting started, and that's it's fun. And again, Cantwell's another great writer that I think very much embraces Star Trek and makes it quite good. James has a point. He says, what do you think that makes Star Trek special to be able to support more than half a century of novels? There are much more successful movie and TV series that can't support continuing fiction.
Well, look at it this way. Star Trek in the novels and the TV shows have spanned, if you go back to Pike and even go back to Jonathan Archer. You're going back from the 22nd century to the 25th century. That's hundreds of years, and all these races and all these ships and all these crews, they're rich for exploration and going forward. You can't do that with some of these other popular franchises. It's like Mission Impossible in 1996 had a whole crew of operatives, and by the third film, it was down to Tom Cruise, Vin Rames, and
the British guy.
I know. British guy.
I know.
Simon Pegg.
Simon Pegg, who co-wrote, by the way, everyone knows Star Trek Beyond. Absolutely, man. I love Simon Pegg.
Yeah,
Space.
so
Come on.
the thing is that how do you do that in a series of novels or comics if you're down to 3 characters and you can't do much with them because of the next film?
Absolutely. James
You
points
know,
out. Go ahead. I was just going to acknowledge. James points out regarding Simon Earth that John Byrne did a great miniseries.
yes, he did.
And also Greg Cox put Gary Seven and Roberta Lincoln in his trilogy about Khan and put them in the
Right. I
90s.
mean,
It was terrific.
they're great characters, worthy of use in the right ways. But back to the larger question, some of these franchises lend themselves, some don't. I think you look at what Taylor Sheridan is doing with the Yellowstone universe. 1883, 1923, soon to be 1944. Yellowstone itself, that is exploring generations and lots of stories to tell. You need something with that kind of scope to it. As popular as, say, a show like The Rookie is, how much more can you do with these characters if you're getting 20 stories a season with them changing and evolving? It would be very challenging.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up The Rookie because, Bob, it's been on my mind. Old-fashioned, forgive me, the way that networks would do, scripted TV, and you'd get 20 episodes to 25 episodes a season, to the streaming leaning on just one story over 8 episodes or 10 episodes or whatever. And I see the benefits of both, but I do kind of miss having episodic stories. And I wish, as much as Strange New World is doing episodic, I sometimes wish they'd get more to straight up Star Trek and less gimmicky shows like the musical and some of the comedies that they've played with.
Yes, I mean, we've seen that everyone becomes a Vulcan in an upcoming episode, and I think that's leaning too much into the humor. Personally, I hope the execution is up to the premise, but we'll see.
I hear you, man. No, I feel the same way. I felt that way last season when they turned Spock human, and it played like a bad Bewitched episode, or I Dream of Jeannie, or one of those where everything's happening under their noses and nobody knows what's going on.
Yep.
Yeah. Bob's keeping it close to the vest, and I can't blame him. Even though among Bob's stuff, not only his great Trek novels, but his wonderful unauthorized Trek history that you wrote a few years ago.
Yeah, that was for the 25th, and right? Yeah, and look where we are now, streaming ahead. Another anniversary next year.
Worry's the wrong word. I wonder with Skydance buying Paramount, what kind of delay we might get for new Star Trek product beyond Strange New Worlds, which I know will continue to roll on, and the new Starfleet Academy that's coming.
Right. Starfleet Academy finished shooting its first season, and there's no air date yet, so hopefully later this year. The next season of Strange New Worlds has apparently already been prepped, and they're going to start shooting soon, I gather. So that's encouraging. They keep banding about Star Trek film property. That's like a bouncing ball that they can't seem to lock onto a writer or a director or a writer-director or the cast, or figure out what they want to do for a feature film. And Chris Pine and that crew want to do a 4th film, but they're all getting a little long in the tooth to pull that off.
Well, or again, given that they established those 3 movies, I'm sure it's not cheap to put them all in a new movie as well. I'm
well,
sure
that's something that's come up. I mean, apparently they've all got their asking prices because their careers have taken off.
Yeah.
So maybe it'll take Skydance buying Paramount to finally put somebody in charge and go, make me a movie, make a good movie.
The other thing that drives me nuts is, and we only got it really in Picard season 3, you've got all these vets from the various shows from the 80s and 90s still around, still vital actors. My God, we really wanted to see, and we got it through the books, more Captain Sulu adventures, what was happening with Chekhov and Uhura in those years after Kirk's disappearance at the beginning of Generations. What happened to them? The same can be applied to these 80s and 90s characters. And again, they're all around. They're all healthy. It's like, my God, use these people and get them, let's get some stories.
Well, there was a lot of buzz after Picard season 3 that there was going to be this legacy show with, Jerry Ryan as the captain of her own Enterprise.
Yep.
And, with those characters could have been really, really interesting, but it's been several years and there's been no action on it. So I gather it's not going to happen. It's wasted potential. But I also recognize that, the streaming landscape has changed from the early days. The budgets are astronomical. Shows are getting canceled if they're not in the top 10 streaming the week they're released. And it's hard to build up a fan base when you've got an 8-episode season and you wait 2 or even 3 years for the next season.
Agreed.
So it's changing the viewing patterns. It's changing how you become a fan of something. It's a shift, and the golden age of streaming may have already come and gone, and I don't know what's next. And I think they're figuring it out too.
Agreed. Absolutely. I got to ask because, man, one of the worst misfires ever was that Section 31 movie. Thoughts?
I understand, you want to take a big swing and do something different. I don't know the people involved in the making of the show. I don't know what their marching orders were. I don't know how much of the proposed Section 31 miniseries or ongoing series got crammed into a film. But we've seen action-adventure Star Trek stories work before. This was an action-adventure story that forgot the Star Trek.
Absolutely, man. Well, and I would agree with you. And again, that is one of the things. And that's why I think we all, and listen, I am not a writer. I'm the first person to admit that. But it seems to me you could do an interesting Star Trek medical show, Star Trek legal show, these other wrinkles that we've seen of how the Federation operates. And that at the very least, you could make movies within those subjects. I mean, I loved, somebody mentioned John Byrne doing the Assignment Earth, the miniseries. Leonard McCoy, Frontier Doctor, what Dr. McCoy was doing after the 5-year mission and before we saw him come back in the 79 movie. I'm like, that's a great idea. I'm like, absolutely. I'd love to see Carl Urban, pull something like that, or another McCoy. Who's to say?
Again, that's one reason why Star Trek endures, because there are these pockets and there are these characters that you really can go off and explore. In the right hands, they could be fascinating.
Agreed.
To coin a phrase.
A couple comments from the chat. Isham says, I like how Star Trek is a flexible shared universe that allows you to use any kind of sci-fi tropes, time travel, robots, aliens, mutant powers, without it feeling out of place. And then James has a question, and that is, was there anything in the Star Trek novel submission guidelines, do's and don'ts, that you disagreed with personally?
The do's and don'ts lists under the editors I worked with were pretty broad. It's not your sandbox. You got to put the toys back as you found them. So don't introduce long lost siblings or forgotten wives or, illegitimate children. You can't disagree with any of that. They're not your characters. So we were encouraged to remember Star Trek was about exploring the human condition. We were reminded Federation had its rules and guidelines, and we had to make sure that we had abided by them. There was nothing too onerous. There was certainly free. We got literally hundreds of novels out of these guidelines, so they were not restrictive.
God, there's a great compendium of all at that point, because certainly there's been a few since then, of all the Star Trek novels, and it is amazing. Yeah. All the hundreds of books that have come out since Spock Must Die. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And also, God, I only knew James Blish from those adaptations of the original series episodes and Spock Must Die. And then I discovered an old, and man, you're likely aware of it as well. It was either X-1 or Dimension X that had an adaptation of one of his short stories called Surface Tension about a microscopic world that is created because the end of the earth is coming. And so they decide to create this microscopic world that it runs at an accelerated rate, and they see future innovations and stuff happening through this microscope, watching this microscopic world, evolve and everything. I don't know if you know that story.
I don't know the story, but like you, I knew James Blish because I was a kid at the time.
Sure.
Through the Trek novelizations of Spock Must Die, and then discovered he was James Blish, great science fiction writer.
Yeah.
And I really got a feel for that when the magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction did a James Blish special issue all about him. And there's the Enterprise in the little tiny bottom right corner, and all this other stuff is like, oh, look at all this other stuff he did.
Pretty amazing, man. Pretty amazing. Forgive me, Starlog, right? Wasn't that the magazine you used to contribute to?
I was on staff there. Sure, it was my first job out of college.
That's what I thought, man. Absolutely. Yeah. No, and you'll forgive me, man. I hope I'm not screwing anybody's copyrights, but on archive.org, there are old issues and stuff of Starlog. It's great to read that stuff, man.
It's out there. If the copyright holder wants to deal with it, that's their issue. I love that it's still out there. I love that people still remember it. In fact, I had a rare instance where I was at a convention in February, and a guy who does sound on the Star Trek shows was one of the guests, and he came over and he said, I grew up on Starlog. I grew up on the stuff you had done, and I learned so much about filmmaking from reading those articles and interviews, and helped lead to the career I've got. It was like, that's cool.
Amazing. That's outstanding, Bob. Well done. Very, very cool. James, what do you got here? That became an episode of Rick and Morty, the car battery episode. All right, I guess I'm a little behind in this season of Rick and Morty, but I love Rick and Morty.
Haven't had time for Rick and Morty.
At first I'm like, yeah, whatever. And Dan Slott convinced me. And he's like, John, it's like Back to the Future, on acid, and it's like it is fun. And Rick essentially is like Doc Brown, and Morty is like Marty, obviously, but it's fun and a lot of great sci-fi tropes in there too.
I probably would enjoy it. The thing is, John, is that there is so much out there, and only so much time when I'm teaching and trying to write.
I understand. Do you have any projects coming? And by the way, congratulations on another year of teaching.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
absolutely. How's that going?
Well, the 8th year at the current school has, ended last Friday, and it was good. It was a good, solid year.
Beautiful.
As for writing, I contributed a short story to a horror anthology called Hearts of the Abyss. Was successfully kickstarted last year. I'm told it's imminent, but I don't have a publication date for it yet. I have a Sherlock Holmes story in Cases by Candlelight, Volume 4, that'll debut at Shore Leave in July, which is the big multimedia show I do every year, now in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And believe it or not, I've started work on Thrilling Adventure Yearns 2026. And when that Kickstarter is going to launch, you and I will be talking.
I look forward to it, man. As always, this is great. And truly, Bob, I thank you as always for coming back and letting us know your thoughts and promoting this great stuff. I'm really glad you guys are out there still and built this great community. Please.
Well, but we started by talking about Peter, and I want to finish by talking about Peter because he was a very talented writer in so many different fields. Animation and live action film and live action television, comic books and prose, original tie-in stuff. It's a career most of us would envy, even though he didn't get the success I suspect he deserved. But beyond that, he was a good friend.
That's beautiful, man.
He always had your back. If you needed to talk, he was there for you. He suffered with you. He was joyful with you for the good stuff. We could talk about the Mets. We could talk about comics. We could talk about our kids. And I miss that. and I miss his humor, and I miss his enthusiasm, and the joy he brought to a room or at a panel. It just made for a special experience.
I regret not having more than one conversation with him at a convention that was all about Star Trek, and he gushed to him about how much I loved his novels, and New Frontier, and everything else. But you're right. We really didn't talk about. In fact, James brings up the Young Justice TV episode that he did, but of course, just the work that he did on the Young Justice comic. And here's a great little splash page with everybody there. So no, I hear you. And also his Babylon 5 work was so great, both
Right.
on the show and also the novels. Please go ahead.
Well, JMS wrote the majority of the show, and Peter was one of the few allowed, to contribute to that. So when the novels happened, the license happened with Del Rey, JMS trusted Peter, to do a bunch of those, which was great, especially since he was doing the Walter Koenig character for a trilogy.
A great Bester story, absolutely, and also wonderful stuff with resolving the Drock influence on Londo Mollari and Centauri Prime and all of that. No, again, much like his Star Trek books, felt like episodes of Babylon 5 that we didn't get to see on the screen. And that's the hallmark of a great writer, man, that he was consistent with the properties that he was working with and finding new ways to tell stories.
Absolutely.
Great stuff, man. Well, Bob, as always, I appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate the conversation today. And thank you, everybody, for the great questions that you've asked. And thankfully, we've got a legacy of Peter David comics and novels and television to enjoy throughout the years. And here's hoping that conclusion Robin of Sherwood happens and everything. That would be great to see.
You and me both.
That'd be amazing, man. Well, thanks everybody for watching and listening. My dear friend Crystal Skillman is going to join us tomorrow night. The New York playwright. She's got a brand new play that we'll be discussing. We'll probably get a word on the Tonys and some other Broadway things. Of course, we got George Clooney's Good Night and Good Luck on CNN. If you caught it, that'll certainly be part of the conversation as well. And a whole bunch more when we come back tomorrow night on Word Balloon Live. Until then, thanks for watching, and stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.